In recent weeks, a dark shadow has descended over the United Kingdom, where cities across England and Belfast have erupted in violence. The streets, usually filled with the hum of daily life, are now scenes of chaos and destruction. Thousands of police officers are on high alert, trying to contain a wave of riots and unrest that have left many wondering what is driving this surge in violence. Join us as we search for the answer to this question. The unrest has been traced back to a series of murders in a seaside town in northwest England. It was here, in the seemingly peaceful town of Southport, that a horrifying crime took place. 3 young girls, aged just 6, 7, and 9, were brutally stabbed to death during a children's Taylor Swift-themed dance class. The alleged perpetrator, a 17-year-old boy, Axel Rudakubana, was swiftly arrested. He was born in Britain, but that fact didn't stop the wheels of misinformation from turning. Rumors quickly spread on social media, falsely claiming that the suspect was a Muslim asylum seeker. These falsehoods, fanned by far-right groups, spread like wildfire, igniting a powder barrel of racial and religious tensions. Nigel Farage, a newly elected MP from the Reform Party and a figure synonymous with Britain's hard-right politics, added fuel to the fire. He speculated publicly, questioning whether the authorities were hiding the truth about the suspect's background. This baseless speculation only served to deepen the already growing mistrust and anger among certain segments of the population. Suspects under 18 are usually not named in the UK, but Judge Andrew Maneri ordered Axel Rudakubana, born in Wales to Rwandan parents, to be identified, in part to stop the spread of misinformation. Rudakubana has been charged with 3 counts of murder and 10 counts of attempted murder. In Southport, a mosque became the target of a furious mob. The imam, along with others inside, was forced to barricade themselves in the office, fearing for their lives as the attackers tried to break down the door. Meanwhile, the violence wasn't confined to Southport alone. It spread across the country like a virus. Hartlepool in the northeast saw police cars set ablaze in London. Crowds pelted the gates of Downing Street and clashed violently with police officers. Even Belfast wasn't spared as tensions flared in the streets. As the violence continued to spread, the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, convened an emergency meeting with police chiefs. His message was clear. This wasn't simply a case of protests getting out of hand. According to Starmer, the violence was a coordinated effort by far-right individuals who were intent on sowing discord and fear. But why now? Why has the UK suddenly been gripped by such widespread violence, all centered around the issue of immigration? To understand this, we need to investigate deeper into the context of Britain's political and social climate over the past few decades. Migration has long been a contentious issue in the UK. It has been a topic of heated debate in both politics and the media, often used as a tool to stoke fears and win votes. The Conservative government, under former Prime Minister Boris Johnson, planned to deport illegal migrants to Rwanda, a controversial policy that was dropped by the new Labour government. Despite this, the rhetoric around immigration has only grown more toxic. In the recent election campaign, both major political parties, including Labour, adopted a hardline stance on immigration. The Conservatives, in particular, used slogans like "Stop the Boats," which played directly into the hands of far-right activists. These slogans have now become rallying cries for those taking to the streets in violent protests. Katie Brown, a postdoctoral fellow at Maynooth University in Ireland, notes that this rhetoric didn't just emerge overnight. It has roots that go back to the Brexit campaign, where anti-immigrant sentiment was heavily promoted by certain factions. The result is a political environment where xenophobic and racist views are not only tolerated but have been mainstreamed. This mainstreaming of hate has had devastating consequences. The far-right groups responsible for the current violence are not organized in the traditional sense. There are no clear leaders or centralized commands. Instead, they are a loose network of individuals and small groups connected through social media, where they spread misinformation and organize protests. The rise of social media has allowed these groups to flourish in ways that would have been impossible just a few years ago. Platforms like Twitter, Facebook, and Telegram have become breeding grounds for extremist ideas, where false information can spread rapidly, unchecked by the authorities. So how do we combat this surge of violence and the misinformation that fuels it? Shabna Begum, Chief Executive Officer of the Runnymede Trust, a British race equality and civil rights think tank, argues that the responsibility lies not only with the far right, but also with the mainstream politicians and media. She points out that the hostile environment created by politicians, particularly in the run-up to the general election, has laid the groundwork for the current crisis. The normalization of anti-immigrant rhetoric, often couched in terms like border security or protecting British values, has given tacit approval to those who wish to turn these words into violent actions. Begum also highlights the racial dimension of the violence. While the riots are ostensibly about immigration, the targets have often been long-settled Muslim communities, as well as black and brown individuals. This is not just about fear of the other, but about deep-seated racism that has been allowed to fester unchecked for too long. What's needed now, according to both Brown and Begum, is a fundamental shift in how the UK approaches these issues. Instead of focusing on criminalising the protests and responding with more policing, there needs to be a broader effort to address the underlying causes. This means tackling the economic and social issues that are driving people to such extremes. Issues like poverty, lack of access to quality education, and the growing divide between the rich and the poor. The Labour government, still in its infancy, faces a monumental challenge. Starmer and his team must navigate a deeply divided nation where the flames of hatred have been fanned for far too long. The question now is whether they have the political will to take the necessary steps to heal these divisions. Will they continue down the path of their predecessors, using immigration as a political football, or will they take a stand against the rising tide of hate? The stakes couldn't be higher. If the current trajectory continues, the UK could see a return to the dark days of the 1960s and 70s when racist violence was a common occurrence. The recent riots are a reminder that those days are not as far behind us as we might like to think, but there is still hope. Communities across the country have begun to come together, standing in solidarity against the violence, protecting their neighbours and rejecting the hate that is being peddled by a vocal minority. The solution lies not just in stronger laws or more police on the streets, but in a collective effort to change the narrative, to move away from the politics of fear and division, and towards a politics of inclusion and hope. It's a difficult road ahead, but one that the UK must take if it is to avoid further descent into chaos. The future of the nation depends on it. Subscribe to Truth Revealed to stay intrigued and informed.